Today we have with us Anna. Anna led system product design on the first generation Apple Watch, and a handful of iPod programs in the 6 years that she was at Apple. She learned firsthand how difficult it is to find and fix issues in development and drive effective process improvements in production, which led her to founding Instrumental, which is used to tackle these issues with technology. So Instrumental is a manufacturing optimization platform used by electronics brands to accelerate development and save millions of dollars in production. And then joining Anna today, we have Rajeev. Rajeev is an automation and robotics engineer who was at Jewel Labs most recently and was employee 1 in their automation and operations engineering department, which he grew then into a 150-person team. And prior to Jewel, he spent 6 years at Apple working on multiple generations of iPad, iPhone, Apple TV, Apple Watch, basically touching everything there. And he is currently the CEO of Clip Automation. I definitely want to give Anna and Rajeev a chance to kind of introduce themselves and introduce a little bit about Instrumental Clip Automation before we dive into the Q&A. So let's start off with Rajeev first. How about you talk a little bit about yourself and Clip Automation?
Great. Hi, Leslie. Hi, Anna. Hi, everyone. Thank you. So my name's Rajeev Bhalla. I'm the CEO of Clip. Prior to this, I was at Jewel, and then I was at Apple. I also worked in hard disk drive and Adept. So my background is manufacturing operations, robotics, and software. One more click, Leslie. At Clip, we're an AI-powered automation productivity company. So our focus is how do we improve productivity in specifically the automation space using communication, collaboration, and so on. Thank you. Glad to be here.
Awesome. So Anna, why don't you take it away now and talk a bit about yourself and Instrumental.
Awesome. Thanks for being here, Rajeev. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Sorry for the crash sound before. I had like a light that fell off the top of my laptop. Yeah, so as Leslie mentioned, I'm a mechanical engineer by training. Rajeev and I actually didn't get to work together at Apple. We met each other later on in our post-Apple experiences. Started Instrumental really around the concept of getting the right data at the right resolution in front of the right people, engineers, in real time. The people that can make the changes, make improvements, make processes better. And we do that primarily by supporting what we call the core loop of essentially engineering, of new product engineering, which is discovering new issues, solving them quickly, and then monitoring them to make sure they don't come back.
Awesome. Thanks, Anna. So what brings us together today is talking about this optimization gap that both Instrumental and Clip Automation kind of try to have an impact on. And so we want to shed light on the industry's lack of focus on innovating processes in favor of just innovating products and why that might have repercussions in terms of a strategy. So to get us started with that, I'd love to pose a question to you both, as you both actually were at Apple, even though, as Anna said, you might not have interacted there too much. But over the course of your careers, you've worked with many organizations since then, and I'm curious how you view their optimization and MPI processes in comparison to Apple.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll just get started with a quick high level where I actually didn't realize that the structure of kind of new product introduction to MPI, that development process, really was invented by Motorola, at least as we understand it today, the EVT, DVT, PVT concept. I just thought that's the way Apple did it. So I thought Apple invented it because that was the first place I worked and encountered it. Essentially, though, there was this diaspora across like the electronics industry as engineers left Motorola, came to Apple, came to other places, and then left those places and brought it elsewhere. And so the structure of MPI is generally similar across the electronics space. I think the core difference that Apple has is that it's really just relentless in its execution. I think a lot of people think that Apple's success is all about their design and having superior design. Really, Apple's success is about having superior execution, and frankly, their manufacturing execution is one of those core places that's pretty like unparalleled in any company that like I've interacted in. That being said, that structure is really similar, and that structure is a really great foundation for companies that don't really have the resources that Apple has to develop great products and still be able to ship on time at high levels of quality. Rajeev,
Yeah.
what do you think?
It's funny you mentioned Motorola. Rita Lane was a VP at Motorola, and you probably remember Rita from your time as well. She was in ops, and she ran manufacturing ops for everything except phone. And she was one of the executives from Motorola who came over. So I'm sure she had a major influence in introducing that philosophy. I agree, you know, and I think the graph that Leslie, you popped up that walked through, you know, everything from pre-builds or protos, I think you called them early builds, and then all the way to EVT, DVT, PVT. I think that methodology is key. It's specific to EMS space in our case, which is I think the people in this call. It's not used extensively outside, so, and it's definitely very unique to Apple, right? Even people and suppliers, it's unique to Apple and the supply chain, and because of that, it's spread out to companies like Google and Amazon. But I think it's definitely, it saw its major push into manufacturing coming out of Apple. There's an interesting comment I'd like to share on the question you asked as well, Leslie, which was, you know, Apple's unique advantage in terms of this process. You know, I think it comes down, for me, you know, it was always this whatever it takes kind of attitude of getting it done, right? How does Apple do it? For me, it was always, Apple had this, you know, relentless focus on schedule, and then all hands on deck and do whatever it takes to get it done. You know, no one leaves until this is solved, right? So there's no giving up. We're going to get this done, and which to me was a major reason for why Apple managed to stay there as well.
Yeah, and how do you think that how has your perspective changed since leaving Apple? Have you identified other differences in other organizations that you've since worked with? How do you view that process now that you both have left Apple?
You know, I think my experience is Apple has a very sophisticated lean team, and it was the ability to move resources and people from wherever, from Mac teams to phone teams to pad teams, you know, and, you know, we talk about like the Apple iPhone, the AirPods are a small business unit. I think they're like maybe an 11. I don't remember the number now, but a few years ago, they were like a very small, minor part of Apple's business. But compared to the rest of the world, I mean, that's a Fortune 500 business. So you'd think, okay, well, we have a small team that's focusing on AirPods, and they would move those people into Mac and into phone and into iPad and other products, and vice versa. So people who had just solved major manufacturing challenges in pad would move into supporting the AirPod team, and so on and so forth. So you had this great cross-pollination of all these business groups that were helping each other in whatever the challenges were. And if you didn't have somebody to solve the problem, you'd pick up the phone and somebody would be on a plane the next day.
I think one thing that I've seen, or that's kind of become more apparent, having worked with a lot of organizations now, like through Instrumental, you know, we've supported the shipment of over 50 products into market, new products into market as Instrumental. Is really the incentive structures are a little bit different between Apple and kind of how Apple's incentive system. Incentive is kind of funky word because I don't necessarily mean like, oh, people will get bonuses. I don't necessarily mean that, but like in terms of how the teams are motivated and incentivized, feels very different at Apple than it does, you know, at other large electronic companies that would view themselves as competitors, or even smaller organizations that might still have, you know, vertical integration across their factory systems. And what I mean by incentives are, you know, at Apple, there was always this feeling as an engineer, which is what I was, that you got it done because it was the right thing to do. Like we did the engineering the right way because it was right, not because it was good enough, but because it was right. And that, you know, sometimes there would be a friction there between like what was requested and what was right. And so that was very interesting, but that was generally like how the teams were motivated to like do excellent engineering. And I think, I don't want to speak too much for the operations team, but I imagine it's very similar. It's like, we want to do it the right way. We don't want to, we're not trying to cut corners here. We're trying to make sure that every product is great for the customer. It's very much a customer driven mindset. Yeah. And it's not that other companies don't have that. It's just that, you know, there are other incentives that kind of seep in. And so the engineers are thinking about like, oh yeah, I'm just trying to get this done versus I'm just trying to do this right. Because I have other stuff I have to go do because I'm on 4 programs, not just 1 program. And there's all sorts of like justifiable reasons for why that is the incentive structure in NPI. But it's just culturally quite different. That's why, you know, they talk about the different business cultures across different companies being a competitive advantage. In the operations side, you know, as you move into production in particular, we've seen like significant incentives around, you know, cost reduction of transform, meaning the cost it takes to take parts into actual finished units, being a huge incentive at, you know, companies that are not Apple. And while that is certainly a core KPI at Apple, and I'm sure Rajeev's organization was really focused on reducing cost of transform, it wasn't like the thing that always won the day. Whereas at many other companies, that cost is the thing that wins the day, even if it means that the product might be less reliable, or the product might be, might have some other kind of customer drawback in some way. And so that's quite different. Like that culture is different. It leads to different outcomes. The incentive structure is a little bit different.
You know, Anna, I think, you know, it's interesting. We had a slightly different take in operations. Right? It was not always, and dare I say it, it was not always quality. I think quality was always, I think that was a bar, right? And it was binary. It was pass or fail. But for us, the key driver, right? So it was a standard you had to meet. So it was not something that you could control. You just had to meet that standard. But the key daily driver was schedule, right? It was always tied around, look, we're going to do, you know, and in all companies, this is where companies really struggle. Right? If you look, most companies, and this is a challenge, most companies struggle to meet their schedules, right? There's all kinds of data out there that about 56% of all companies actually miss their product launch schedules, right? So whatever they say they're going to do, whatever they plan to do, they don't meet it. And for companies that are relentlessly focused on schedule, I think that's where they start looking at areas of incremental optimization and improvements. And, you know, we were using Apple as an example, but Apple did that incredibly well. We knew those schedules were not negotiable. So if you had a process or a machine that was performing and that was meeting spec, right, and that was meeting quality, and you were getting the product, you were going to use it. If you didn't, and you were going to start pushing the schedule out, then that machine at some point was going to have to go, or that process would have to change. Something would have to change because the schedule was not negotiable. So I think that focus on schedule, you know, the all hands on deck, you know, and then not giving up and doing whatever it takes, you know, 16, 18 hours on the floor, people sleeping sometimes you know, Apple suppliers had rooms with kitchens and bedrooms. They had places, they had little small rooms with a bed. You could close the door and take a nap, and then you could take a shower and get breakfast and lunch and dinner. Everything was already there. So there were people who would spend sometimes 48, 72 hours on a factory floor.
So how do you go about optimizing this process, this NPI process, that it seems like it's the secret sauce to having a competitive advantage within the industry? How do you go about speeding this up, and why should it be a priority?
So I think it does come down to speed and velocity. It's velocity of execution. It's being nimble, right? So taking mission-driven companies like Apple out of the equation, because that's a very unique case, right? And that's an exception, and we talk about it as a paragon for what we're doing. But if you look at day-to-day stuff, I think the first is, is it a job or is it a mission, right? You need people who are impassioned, who care about this. But you also need people who can actually be creative and move the needle. I think part of the challenge in traditional manufacturing and NPI space in particular, and Anna's alluded to this in the past in our conversations, is it's not tied around, process innovation. People do it the way they do it because that's how they've done it. So they're applying old tools, it's a serial development process. And I think we have to approach this in a way of like, hey, if you're truly going to be competitive, you're going to meet schedules, you're going to stay on track in terms of quality and cost milestones, you've got to be faster, and you've got to squeak out incremental innovation everywhere, not just in one or two areas. And you can't be using snail mail when there's more instantaneous means of communication. You can't be putting people on the plane every time there's an issue because there's a cost impact. You have to find other ways of doing things, and companies that do, they're more successful.
Yeah, I think we were talking about like optimization in manufacturing for electronic space has really primarily looked at the production scene. Like, how can we optimize cents out of our process? How can we optimize headcount? How can we optimize every second? And actually, that kind of optimization we were talking about yesterday makes supply chains more brittle. And that's exactly what we're seeing now with COVID, is that the brittleness in those supply chains. Like, oh, we can, if we move our supplier into another country, we can save $1. So we're going to do that. Oh, wait, that country now has problems with COVID, so now we have no supply. That's the example of how this optimization can become incredibly brittle. But on the flip side, optimization in NPI, which is a place that's kind of oh, that's the R&D part. It's going to be expensive. It's going to be messy. Let it be the way it is actually a massive missed opportunity. And because optimization there gives your company resiliency and agility, because you have a really simple process that's really baked. You can move that anywhere. You don't have to worry about if this place is open or that place is open, or if you need more lines or less lines. It's all easier because everything's more fully baked, because it was baked better in NPI. And so if you think about okay, well, how do you do that in NPI? That's weird, because we're used to shaving cents. Does that mean we're shaving cents in NPI? No, it means we're looking for places where processes take a long time, where time is wasted, where money is wasted, where people are wasted. And by identifying that waste, and that enables us to find opportunities for improving it. So Rajeev, you talked about snail mail, or we certainly have we have customers who don't even know how many units they built yesterday, except for tick marks with pencil and paper. I mean, this is an extreme, obviously many companies usually have an MES where they can get this data, but not all of them do. And so this kind of leveling up of just even understanding what you're doing and where that data is and what's in the data, and finding ways to get real-time access to that data, so it's not something you have to request, wait for overnight, get an email, oh, that's not what I meant something else. Or the Excel files that have a little picture in every single cell that you have to open each individual picture for your failure analysis report. These are the places where there is waste. And if you're an engineer, the folks that I see that are on the call, if you're an engineer, this is waste. It's your waste, like your wasted time, and your time is incredibly valuable, more so than the cents that you could be saving on the parts. It's not about saving cents in the parts. It's about accelerating the work that you're doing. The sooner you get that fix in, the more mature that fix will be by the time like the deadline comes around for production. And so really, I think when we think about optimization, there is this really untapped gold mine of potential in MPI.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. And Julian just made a comment on the Q&A about optimization without a contingency plan is brittle. I agree with that. I see optimization as, you know, what supply chain and manufacturing operations organizations do is they're continuously optimizing for cost, right? Quarterly, on a quarterly, you know, annual basis, they're just looking for cost reduction, right? Is there a reason? It's like, no, but there should be. It should be there. And what ends up happening is when you iteratively cost reduce a process, that's where, you know, the brittleness comes in. You're losing flexibility. And we're seeing that now when, so you get this hyper lean, you know, inflexible, but JIT kind of system that works just right for just this process that's incredibly brittle. And now suddenly you've lost all flexibility, right? Because you can't, you know, an alternate vendor, an alternate supply chain, that's cost, or some other variance in your process is incremental cost, but it's working. And I think that's what we're dealing with right now. So there's this flexibility versus efficiency, you know, trade-off that companies make. And the way operations has done this is they've always focused on cost reduction. And I think we need to focus on other areas so that there's still flexibility in the process. And companies that aren't doing that are actually hurting. And a lot of these companies are going to actually struggle. There's a great book by Siebel called Digital Transformation. If people haven't read it, please read it. And he talks about this age of extinction that's coming up, where companies are actually going to die in the next 10 years, where people are going to struggle, companies are going to struggle to survive because there's such a massive tsunami of change and disruptive and innovative methods coming. So if we're not optimizing, if we're not innovating, if we're not improving, our competition is. And if not everyone is doing it, the ones that are nimble and that can adapt and change, they're the ones who are going to survive, right? A very Darwinian kind of approach to corporate evolution.
It seems like this optimization is important, and we've definitely, you know, audience members have started to agree that it's something that should be of value in optimizing NPI in particular. But it seems like right now there are a lot of heroics that are a core part of getting NPI to happen. And why is it that we have, you know, had this focus or this resistance to getting digitalization into the NPI process, and we're, you know, instead relying on these heroics from these individual contributors?
Anna, you want to go first?
Well, I was just gonna say, Rajeev and I had like a very distracting prep call where we kept talking about the war stories, and we realized that it's actually like that heroicism is kind of a part of NPI. And that is something we're both kind of like a little proud of, but maybe like we shouldn't be. And that was kind of an interesting realization for us, that actually the necessity for heroism in an NPI process, the like get on the plane, like get back in the van, go back, you know, across the Hong Kong border into China, like that kind of thing, like pulled the all-nighter in the factory, is like actually the wrong KPI. The fact that you're doing that is actually an anti-KPI. Like ideally, you should be able to run your build process on the schedule that you planned, and things should go according to plan, and you will find issues and you solve them in the timelines that you have, and like you get to production and everything's great and everything's smooth. And like I've never seen a program work like that. Like, and I've now seen like many programs, not only at Apple, but across like many electronics companies. There's always like the heroics, and there's always like a little bit of pride in the heroics, but actually like the heroics are an anti-KPI. And so I think there's like the heroics actually kind of make it so that, you know, a team is less willing to innovate. And I said, well, we did it last time, or like, oh yeah, but we got the best people, like our people will solve this problem. And I think it's like wanting to kind of, you know, shake out of the daydream of like, actually like stop drinking the Kool-Aid on the heroics. Like the heroics are bad. How would you design this whole process to work if you couldn't get on the plane at any moment and like go solve the problem in person? And I think that's actually what companies are discovering right now, where they can't get on the plane anymore, and where they're remote controlling, or like at the end of a very, very distant FaceTime call, trying to figure out what's going on and help their in-factory team solve problems. And so yeah, I think that like really we want to be looking towards the adoption of tooling and technology, and that just because you have a badass team that like is totally capable of the heroics does not mean that they should be, and that it's healthy that they are. I think it's actually like an anti-signal, that it means your organization is actively not innovating in ways that they could be.
Yeah, I think there's always going to be a need for experts to come in and solve last minute problems. It's going to happen, right? But the more planned you are, the more efficient you are, the more tools you have, so that it's situation normal, right? And it's not all effed up, that the better off you are, right? The more deviations, right? If there's no event, there's no story. It's like, hey, we had a plan, we had a schedule, and how'd it go? Oh, we hit it. Okay, well, do we need a war room? No, we don't. We're on track.
There's no like pats on the back for that, right? Like,
well, and that's the regrettable part. Like, you know, if there's no pats on the back and kudos, it's like, well, maybe it wasn't that hard. I think it's really hard, right? It's, you know, the better prepared you are for that, the less exceptions you have to handle at the end. But planning up front is really hard, and it takes investment in tooling, right? Which is the business we're in. It's how do you plan so that, hey, we're enabling our people with the tools and the skills and the knowledge we need, so that they're not having to do weird stuff, right? Shotgunning something in at the last minute, you're going to have to do that because there's always going to be some 5-10% of stuff, you know, that you didn't think of. But it's the stuff up front, right? And that's where companies struggle, right? They miss their schedules, they miss their cost targets, and then they're suddenly cost downing while they're ramping production or post-event, and they're not able to do it, right? And then a year passes or a year and a half passes, and it's like, oh my God, we're still not hitting our margins, right? So being efficient up front, and specifically during the NPI cycle, is key in that way.
So how does an organization create change around this process? I know there's certainly a top-down approach that might need to be implemented, but what can even, not only from a strategy, from a top-down approach, but what can even individual contributors do on teams in order to enact change so that the heroics are no longer necessary?
I think it has to be, the first is you've got to have conviction to ask for what you need. In terms of tooling, in terms of efficiency software, because that's the tic-tac stuff, right? So there's this reluctance to want to innovate in the process because we don't think of it that way. It's like, why do I need something new when I've already got a method to do it? That's not where people innovate. I think people have to challenge themselves and their management, right? Because, how do you attribute value to productivity tools that aren't quantifiable, right? You can measure it in terms of, performance output or OEE or quality or yield, but how do you attribute value to a productivity tool where you can't see it right away? It's like, well, it just made me faster, it made me more efficient. How do you attribute value to the ability to Slack somebody and then not have to email, not have to text 7 people, or create a group chat? You just put it on a channel, and even if people aren't online, they can come back in later. So productivity tools are a great way for people to start, in my opinion, right? That's where you start. Make yourself more efficient, make your workplace more efficient. Handle the low-hanging fruit like communication, collaboration. That's a great place to start. And then get the tooling you need to make yourself better. It's that investment in infrastructure that's going to set you apart.
One thing that we see as a pattern for organizations who are able to successfully bring in new technologies, and I don't mean this just about instrumental, but also about other technologies that we're aware they're also incorporating and innovating with, is a combo. It's a two-punch. So it takes two to tango. It's a top-down, essentially top-down air cover that like this stuff matters. So if you're a leader, it's like making sure your team knows that identifying opportunities for improvement is a positive thing that reflects on them positively. And then it's bottoms up, like identification of issues, the identification of an opportunity to actually solve the problem, like be more efficient, amplify their work, and to say, yes, this makes me better. And that can be hard for an engineer, like an individual engineer, because they don't want to admit they like need some tool to do their job. They like, maybe there's all sorts of other factors there. But if you have both, if you have the bottoms up, like adoption of, yeah, this is really helpful, and those individuals are able to help like either the technology company or articulate the benefit, even if the benefit doesn't have a direct dollar sign today. Because it's hard to say, we have this problem where it's like, we find an issue on the first day of EVT, right? Everybody agrees that's a good thing to find it on the first day. When would they have found it if they didn't have a technology looking for issues? Like, who knows? So you can't even quantify the value. It's like, you might have found it tomorrow. You might have found it like weeks from now, DVT, PVT, obviously the later you find it, more expensive it is. So what's the value? That's like kind of the tricky point, but everybody acknowledges that finding something on day one is a good thing. And so you have the engineer at the bottom saying, we found this, it was valuable, I was able to fix it, etc. And you have the top down kind of air cover of like, yeah, this is preventing that anti-KPI of the heroics, because we were able to do something in the time span of the build and the time span of the schedule that we have. So that's something that we've seen. It takes two to tango in an organization. And if you have one or the other, it's not enough. And so actually like that's where it can be complex. So like you can have high level leadership that's super bought in, but if the individual engineers don't see individual value, there won't be usage or engagement. And so you see like a lot of like the industry 4.0 kind of industrial IoT stuff was often top down, and that's why it didn't do well. And then if you have bottoms, only the bottom side, where it's like all the ICs want this thing, but you have no kind of air cover from hiring the organization, then it can also be really difficult, because it's not like the most urgent thing. So that leader only is like dealing with all sorts of other fires that are much bigger in scope and scale, that they are much more urgent, but maybe, just as important. So yeah, that's kind of something that we've observed.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so in terms of optimization, and it definitely seems like time is a factor. It's this kind of soft ROI that you can get from making changes, whether it's through technology or through other means. We actually had a question from an attendee come up, and they said that they believe a lot of companies underestimate how hard actual NPI project is. Definitely, we agree. But it seems like a lot of de-risking can be done on the development side. What are your thoughts on external help from engineering firms de-risking upfront, allowing the actual NPI project to be on budget and on target? And maybe even to add on to this question, engineering firms versus technology, how do you weigh those options that are available in terms of optimizing NPI?
I think the challenge companies, so I think that's a very powerful thing to do. But that's a lesson companies learn after they miss a few schedules, or after they've fluffed a few launches, right? It's not real until the game's not real until they're on the court, and a lot of times it has to be during a build. A lot of companies don't treat builds as seriously as they probably could, and I think there's such an emphasis on product versus introduction that I got to focus on my product. It's a 16-week schedule, and on week 15, I finish my product, and good luck to everybody in manufacturing and squeezing out all the manufacturing issues in that last week. But I think we're on schedule because I'm on schedule. So I think there's there's a there's a communication collaboration element that extends from product design into manufacturing, right, all the way through the supply chain, right? Manufacturing ops is NPD, NPM, right? It includes both, right? Because there's product evolutions going on. If there's issues, there's manufacturing, there's process evolutions, and then there's manufacturability and then scaling steps going on. So there's a lot happening in that process, but it's that lack of appreciation of, it's not just a product focus, it's a process and scaling and cost focus. All of that occurs, and companies don't factor that in. In a lot of cultures, it's because the NPI process is owned by a product team and not a manufacturing team. So that's a challenge. So you can address that through who owns the build, right? Who's driving the build? Are you even having a build process, or are you just like, hey, we designed this, go make it, and then send us the good parts? And then how did it go in between? I was like, well, I'm not quite sure. The vendor, I'm sure, will let me know. And then you have no control or visibility or optics on your process. How do you cost reduce something that you can't see, right? Somebody tells you this is what it is. So I think there's a communication challenge there, but there's also a cross-function collaboration across an organization and their kind of manufacturing supply chain that has to occur.
I would say, just to kind of address the point of the question around like external firms, and like how do companies that maybe are doing NPI for the first time or the second time, or they're pulling together a new team that hasn't worked together. Really, I think what firms do is that they can help bring expertise if you don't have it on the team. I think nothing can replace, and this has been the case in manufacturing for decades and probably centuries, that like nothing can replace expertise and kind of the war scars or the stories, and the hard-earned lessons. And so that's a great thing that you can get with a firm who's done this for 25 years and like seen 100 programs go down, up, down, and sideways, and they can help to identify places in your product or in your process which are going to be weak. I often I think that like expertise can manifest itself even within the team itself. Like once you've done a couple of programs, you can sit and watch an engineer kind of present like, oh, we're building this new product. It has like this feature that like you can twist and this happens. And you can look at that product and you be like, these are the 5 things that are going to break in your product. And that's like the value of expertise. And that exists not only on the engineering product side, but also on the ops side, where it's like, someone who's like an operational expert will look at this and be like, wait, how are you gonna source that part that like seems like the tolerances have to be super tight in order for that to work, or whatever? Like, how are you gonna get that fabric to be just perfectly aligned? Like that seems like a complete like a challenge. Or like your seals are all with glue, like and so those are all things that like expertise helps you find. And so firms can be great for that. Certainly, you can have all the technology in the world, but if you have a team that doesn't have any expertise or doesn't have any experience, you're gonna struggle. But you're gonna learn a lot in that first one, and then you'll have expertise the next time around. So that's kind of maybe a reaction to that question. And then just to kind of Rajeev's point around the schedules, like the schedules that are designed by the product side or whatever generally are idealized, and they don't account for the fact that there will inevitably be things that are not anticipated that come up, whether it's with a supplier or a quality issue or design issue or whoever. And then that's what happens where your schedules start to get crunched, and then everything starts to act weird. Like they stop working. You're like kicking off hard tools before you get your validation data back from your first build. Things like that start to happen when the schedules get crunched. So I think a lot of this pain could just be resolved by having schedules with like a little bit more buffer in them and a little more time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you guys saw it, right? Companies routinely miss their schedules. The thing is, we never hear about it. We only hear about it when major big companies miss their launch windows.
Or they announce and the product doesn't show up.
Right. So they announce something and then something happened, and it's usually if it's in product or it's in operations when they found a major issue. the thing is, a lot of companies don't announce their schedules, right? Precisely because of that reason. So Intel just announced that they're going to miss their 7 nanometer windows, right? And they're going to revert back to 10 and do all this stuff. Apple may or may not be able to hit its iPhone 12 schedules, right? My belief is, they're going to sort through this. But a lot of companies, Motorola very famously did not hit their schedules last year, right? When they announced their new phone, it came back, the Razr, they missed the schedule, and everybody knew everything about it, and then they were failing during their tests. That's an operations fail. And so what small companies do is they don't announce their schedules. So they're accountable internally, but it's routine to miss schedules. It's like, most companies probably miss by 90 to 120 days, right? Most scheduled launches are missed by, 3 to 4 months because they go, oh, we're going to do this. And what happened? Well, we found a bunch of stuff, but it wasn't in our schedule. So that's to Anna's point about unrealistic schedules. So what are you going to do? Well, everything slides to the right? And you have Proto 1, Proto 2, EVT 1, EVT 2. If companies are actually doing that. A lot of companies don't even do this. EVT, DVT.
DVT 3 is a failure. If you're on a DVT 3, that is an anti-KPI.
Right. And yet, yeah, so then they'll do like mini builds and stuff like that, right? There's ways of disguising this stuff. The reality is it is going to take that long to incubate. And how quickly can you do it, right? How quickly can you do the discovery up front on day 1 so that you're not finding out on day 89 that, oh man, I have a reset, or I got to spin a new board, or I got to get new hardware, I need a new process tool. That stuff takes, as soon as you get out of software space into hardware space, now you're talking weeks and months in the best case, right? If not 2-3 months. And I think companies have to figure that out. So front loading.
How do we fix that? Seems broken, Rajeev. Like,
well,
but like we're all kind of here like, hey, there's a problem.
Well,
how do we fix it? How do our attendees, like, who might be nodding, maybe not, like if you're not nodding, let us know in the chat that you disagree. But like if they're nodding, like how do they fix it? Like it seems so broken that it's more than just something like an individual can solve.
I think the first is accountability. It's not always clear who's accountable systemically. People focus on their thing. It's not unusual for companies to have product design is, or engineering is doing this, manufacturing is doing this, now procurement has a shot. So and they're all mutually exclusive. So you have different functional departments maintaining their little areas of influence, and then they're controlling that. And then how does it all come together so there's better collaboration during the true NPI process? So it's not supply chain is just managing procurement and there's no engineering input. There has to be something there. And it has to be upfront. It can't be, hey, a bunch of random parts showed up on the floor and then, just a little bit of pre-meeting and pre-information, and some engineer could have said, no, these aren't going to work, and here's the reason why. And that could save you a lot. That would be a very simple thing, but that's cultural, right? That's basically in the DNA of how companies run their PLCs. And that would be a great place to start. The second is really investment in collaboration tools, tools like what Instrumental does, what Clip is trying to do, where people are saying, hey, how do I facilitate, enable, and amplify the free flow of information across not just within my organization, but outside my organization? So I get the input, right? You can avoid major mistakes just by talking about it, just by having information available. So somebody looks at something, it's like, hey, this is an issue. And it always shows up in schedules, which is tied to cost, right? You miss, a Me Too product 6 to 9 months after the market leader entered a market. And it doesn't matter how much better you are, right? Some companies are going to be able to turn that because they have so much brand power that they're able to push it through, where they don't have to be, first to market. But for a lot of companies, having another Me Too product And missing your launch windows is the difference between success and failure.
So yeah, it seems like it's very much a cultural shift, mindset shift, and also the tactical things, which include, you know, getting access to the information you need, having that free flow of information, which can be solved through technology. Anna, what is your perspective on this? How do people go about creating change and really impacting how NPI is running and working to accelerate that in this, you know, COVID state that we're in?
I mean, I think there's, because of that like hero culture, it almost breeds like silence around stuff that's like really messed up. So like I have friends at Apple. I got friends at, you know, all of the top electronics companies in the Valley because I'm a mechanical engineer. So I know a lot of mechanical engineers. And like, I'm hearing about teams that are literally working 6 p.m. to 5 a.m. for 2 weeks in a row here in California because they're working the China day shift. And they are on 8-hour phone calls. They're like trying to work. They're trying to do what was kind of already like not a great, brittle process of like flying there to try to discover and fix these issues. They're trying to do that remotely with something even worse than like what their previous not great situation was. And I think because of the kind of hero culture, like engineers are kind of expected to, and maybe other factors around like, hey, it seems like companies are shutting down or stuff. So like maybe I'm worried about my job if I like complain about, you know, being asked to work the night shift or, you know, something like this. But this is like not how great engineering happens. And so I think like a step back and looking at like, wait, what am I doing every day right now in this COVID time? And like, is this great engineering? Am I like proud of the engineering that's happening here? Is this what I would do if COVID wasn't a factor? And if not, then like, I think there's a need to like ring the bell or wave the flag a little bit, that like, hey, this is broken. Like there's ways to do that aren't, you know, complaining or that are productive. And I think that's ultimately like those identification of issues, like the management may not know, or they may view as temporary, but they're not understanding the total impact on like the quality of the work and engineering that's being done on their teams. Or if they don't really have other options or choices. And so if you see like, oh, hey, if we got like, we could really reduce the amount of back and forth here if we just got like this FTP server set up, or if we just, you know, integrated Dropbox so we could send these reports back and forth, or like there may be like really low tech things that would be very easy, that you could swipe a credit card and could solve some initial problems. And I think that that like we get into a mindset, and I say we because like I can put my engineer hat on, and we get in this mindset where we're just trying to get through. And I think that this is not a get through moment. Like this is going to last. And so the sooner we identify collectively like the places that are most painful and try to find bridges there, the better not only you'll be as an engineer, the better your team will function, the better the products you'll ship will be. And then because the product is better, it's better for the company. So there's like all the way up, it's better. And so I think that's like the kind of the suggestion or the thought around how individual engineers could actually, you know, make change in organizations that seem too large and unwieldy, or like, oh, I'm sure the security team would say no. Actually, you don't know that. We get like we talk to a lot of security teams. And I think a lot of mechanical engineers are like, oh no, there's no way we're not allowed to take prototypes out of the building. There's no way we'll be able to do X. Ask, because you might be surprised. Like the security of many of these tools has improved so significantly that like actually they might be able to. And so maybe don't try to shoot your own idea down before you actually kind of investigate with the organization if that could help.
You know, sorry, Leslie. If I may add another comment, I think there's also a major white elephant in this room, right? Which is the majority of supply chain operations, manufacturing, NPI activity is actually done overseas and not in the United States, right? It's in places like China. And we talked about remote collaboration. But to me, a major problem is there's, and this is an evolution that has to occur in China as well. If for China to remain competitive as a supplier, and I think they're struggling with this, and they're seeing this slow erosion of capability. For China to remain competitive, they've got to invest in incremental technologies that enhance it, right? China doesn't want to pay for efficiency, for improvement software. Why? They'd rather just not pay. If they can make do, and they can do it in-house, but they're not going to want to pay for a Dropbox. They'll just figure something else out. So, but the real innovation, right, has to be iterative. You don't get step function 10% increases in efficiency or in schedule gains. There are things that are going to get you there. And maybe you get, if you need 20%, you're going to get a few big ones. But the rest of it is going to come from all the little small things you do in your workflow, right? 1%, 0.5%. And you do enough of those, and suddenly you've got something that's worth as much as your big ticket items.
Yeah, the pennies add up.
The pennies add up. And I use China as an example because we all see how there's a lack of investment in efficiency and productivity software there. But that's how companies actually stay efficient, get ahead. That's how you bridge the optimization gap. You're going to do the big stuff. You're going to figure it out because it's going to be there. If you're not doing it, you're going to struggle. But the real edge is in recognizing that, hey, if you also do a lot of the small stuff that gets you one step faster, that 1%, 2% efficiency gains in your entire workflow process, that's that iterative evolution that occurs that gets you forward. And large companies do that incredibly well because they see the value and they have the ability to detect it. Small companies struggle with that because small to mid-sized businesses struggle with that because the leadership's not thinking that. It's like, hey, I got so many big problems to solve. I don't have time to think about, hey, what else could I be? Do I have time for the tic-tac stuff when I've got major, things going? So, nobody's going to worry about a cut on their fingers when they've got major surgery. But sometimes you've got to kind of embed that in your system so you have the ability to address both.
Or maybe there's like the allocation of responsibility outside of one bottlenecking executive. Like one bottlenecking executive can handle the big stuff, the major issues, but like distributing ownership down into managers, directors, leads, even to make some decisions about minor things, as long as security team approves or et cetera, can make it so these things can happen. And we actually see a lot of concentration of approval much higher in an organization, which I think slows down innovation. If you give license to innovate lower down in the organization, like the things that work will bubble up and will spread.
I think if you're a DRI or you're an individual contributor, I think the challenge, you can't wait for it to come from the top down. Hey, here's a productivity tool. I think it actually has to be bottom up. You've got to be like, hey, this is what I need to be better. And this is what I think we should do. It's going to pass or fail very quickly, right? If you're in the middle of a build and you got a tool that's not working, you're not going to sit there and suddenly go, okay, well, let me spend a day trying to fix this. You're going to say it's working or it's not. It's very binary. It's going to happen fast. So if the solutions you're trying aren't working, you just got to iterate and try something else. But you got to keep moving forward too. And I think it has to come from the bottom up.
That makes a lot of sense. So I think in these last couple of minutes, definitely want to remind the audience that we are open for questions. So if you have any last questions here, we definitely want to take them. But in kind of some final notes, it sounds like it's a lot of changing the culture, distributing the ability to make decisions, empowering ICs to surface up these technologies that could be helpful. I guess as we're waiting for audience questions here, it'd be great to hear from the both of you how people should think about evaluating these solutions. Like what is a good solution that can be helpful now? Is it something that can be deployed quickly? Is it something that, what are those criteria that can really allow a technology that you're evaluating to be impactful immediately?
Mhm.
Impact and implementation time. And like low lift, because your team's already like working the night shift, you know, like that's not a team that's going to be innovating. So I think those three things.
Yeah. I would shift the emphasis to it has to happen earlier, right? Nobody wants to deploy a new weapon system in the middle of a campaign, right? It's just too risky. So what are they going to do? We're going to go with what we know and what we know works, however efficient or inefficient it may be. So the challenge is, can we do it early enough so that we're not on the production floor, we're not in mass production? Can we do it early enough in NPI where we can actually make mistakes or try things out and recover from them? Can we do it in our labs, in our offices? And I think there's an element of timing. There's an element of timing to change as well, right? So for all of us who deal with this daily, it's, you know, you've got to plan through this a little bit. You've got to be able to time this stuff. You've got to be able to budget and plan for this, and you've got to fight and push for it. No CIO is going to say, hey, let's just buy you, you know, $100,000 worth of new software tools to try out. You're going to have to take that and push that through. But I think that's where innovation really is anyway. It has to be at the grassroots level. And I'm reading the Q&A, and I mean, it is cultural. There's comments about it being cultural, and I completely agree. It is definitely a cultural thing, but culture is not, top-down culture is great. There has to be support, but it's got to be bottom-up. Those are the cultures that persist.
Makes a lot of sense. So we've definitely had a lot of comments throughout during the session and questions that have had bubbled up. I guess in these last minutes here, are there any final notes or any final messages that both of you would like to share with the audience?
I would suggest, you know, that if manufacturing operations is going to be a competitive advantage, it has to be a strategic focus from the top down. But the engineers who are doing it also have to kind of clamor for a seat at the table. It can't be engineering only driven. It can't be procurement only driven, right? And so all the groups have to work together. It can't be quality driven. That's one. The second end is the point you made about heroics is key. You know, companies like Apple, I don't know if you guys saw those United reports last year, but Apple spends $150 million in business class seats. And there was a statement where 50 business class seats from San Francisco to Shanghai were Apple. Every day, Apple had 50 business class seats. And that was just the San Francisco to Shanghai route.
On the United flights.
On the United flights. And for those of us that remember this, I remember going onto those flights and saying, oh, there's at least 8 to 10 people I know. And there were more than one flight. There's 8 to 10 people both ways, right? So there were at least 2 flights. And I would look at the plane and I'd go, oh, there's 8 people I know. And there were times where I'd be sitting down, there's somebody next to me, I didn't know them. And then eventually over the course of the flight, I would discover when all the I things came out that they were an Apple person. So I think the culture of heroics has to change to a more systemic, like process-based approach where there's less need for heroics. It's still going to be there, but there's less need.
I would just say that I think that people think of like, you know, transformation and like, and incorporate, you know, like the optimization as like these big concepts that it's like, oh, we'll do that in 5 years. The time is never better than now. The tools that are available out there provide real benefits, and they provide them now, and they create competitive advantages that enable companies to ship better products, stay on time instead of having the slipping schedules. And as a result of doing that, they are functionally more competitive. And maybe it enables them to do more with less, which I think particularly in this like belt tightening time for electronics companies is a major advantage as well. So I would say that like this concept that these are big things that can be tackled later, like after the pandemic or when we kind of get our sea legs again, it will be too late because there are companies now who are putting these tools into place now because they have pain now that they can justify like the initial expenditure, and they're going to get an acceleration that is going to be really difficult to keep up with. And so I think it's more of the siren call or the warning of like that this is coming, and you're on the bus or you're not on the bus. And I think it's going to be, if you're not on the bus, it's going to be really hard not to be left behind. So I guess that's my last thing. But just want to thank everybody and thank Rajeev for spending some time with us this afternoon. And thank everybody for attending. And certainly we're open to answering additional questions. If there's other questions, feel free to reach out where we can get you in touch with Rajeev if you have questions for him. And ultimately, we're just trying to build a community that has real talk about these things, because I think there's a lot of fluff. And so glad that you were all able to join us here today.
Thanks, Hannah.
Yeah.
Thanks, Leslie.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank
Reach out to Instrumental if you have any further questions. We'll get you connected with somebody you can talk to.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks.